Welcome back, Hero Forge fans. I am still Dr. Faust of Dr. Faust Painting Clinic, here with another painting tutorial for you. Hopefully you still are practicing your layering techniques, because we're going to continue working on that, but we're going to start working on specific colors. There's some shades of paint that are a little bit more difficult to paint, one of those being black, which is what we're going to cover today. There are a number of different ways to highlight and paint black, and we're going to go over several different ways and also go into the controversy of, do you shade black? So let's get into it. So to begin with, painting our gunfighter here, I've already base coated in Vallejo Game Color Black, and that's going to be our base coat and our shade, because we do not shade black. You can't get any darker than black. So we're beginning with the highlights right away, using some Vallejo Model Color German Gray. We do have the paint thinned, just as we would if we're normally layering any other color, and I'm trying to keep the highlights very subtle, because you have to be careful with black. If you over highlight it, it'll start turning into gray or some other color. Now, there are different ways to paint black, and there's different arguments about what is correct or not. The main issue is you don't want to over highlight it though. Keep the upper highlights on just the sharp edges, which we don't have a lot here on this jacket he's wearing. It's mostly smooth, rounded curves. To our German gray, I have now added some dark sea gray and proceeding to add more highlights. You can see how subtle we are already painting the highlights. Very small areas. We don't want to overdo it. Overdoing the highlights, like I said, you're going to start ending up with gray rather than black. If that's what you want, well then we're going to go over that in the next step. But right now I'm trying to keep a fairly new looking black jacket on this guy. And then our final highlight, more of the dark sea gray added. And you can see this is going just on the edges of the jacket, the sharp edges, so they stand out a little bit more. I should point out at this point, some artists really like to punch up the edges on black, almost going up to pure white. That's just not personally my style. But if you want to over highlight black, this is the point where you would do it. So you could ramp up the color right here just on the edges alone to like a light gray, if that's the look that you would more prefer. And the last step is optional. We're going to go back with black if needed. Some areas maybe we highlighted a bit too much, need to clean up. So we're going to take some very thin black paint, kind of use it as a glaze and just work it into the recesses, try to soften some of those highlights if they went too far into the base coat or the shade area. So that's it for the jacket, and that's a traditional painting black technique there for a neutral black. But for the pants, let's try something a little different. Let's go for a more faded black. So at this point, we're going to go up to a little bit more towards a gray color. And once again, already base coated with straight black. And now I have added some Game Color Bonewhite to that, and proceeding to add the first highlight here. This is more of a base coat, to be honest. I'm putting this over a greater area because I want the pants to look more washed, a little bit more faded. So also have to point out that the Bonewhite, it's a very light color, close to white. So I've added just a very small amount to the black, because if we add too much, it's really going to overpower things. So just a little bit. It's always best to err on the side of caution and add a little bit too much and have to go over with another coat than to put too much and then have to redo everything. Our next highlight, more Bonewhite added. Once again, very small amount. And just proceeding to start working on those highlights. As always, paint is thinned. We build up 2 or 3 or 4 layers, so we get a nice slow contrast. On the pants here, unlike with the jacket, we can spread out those highlights a little bit more because we are going for a faded black, almost a very, very dark gray, if you will. And then for our final highlight, yet more of the Bonewhite added. You can see working on those highlights on just very small areas, tops of the folds, top of the pants, and also the knees. Knees are a good place to over highlight on a figure like this because, you know, that knees on pants tend to get worn more than other areas of the pants. The last thing to do is to finish off with a very light wash of thinned black ink. Because we over highlighted, we went for a little bit more of a faded black. We can actually add some black to the recesses here for some extra shade. So very carefully, very lightly just brushed in, kind of like how we did with the jacket. Some people actually prefer this method of painting black in general. I do think it actually results in more of a dark gray effect than black, so it's not my preferred technique when painting black in general. However, I will mention I have used this technique before, kind of similar to this, where you can greatly over highlight black and then put a very thick, almost solid black ink glaze over it, and it tones everything down and gives it a nice rich sheen, which we're not going to go over in this video, but I just thought I'd mention that if you're looking for a really quick way to paint black. Just kind of overdo the highlights and just put a black glaze on it, and you can call it a day. So we painted a neutral black, we painted a faded black, now we're going to do a cool black, and we do that by adding blue to the highlights. This method of painting black I tend to reserve for when I want something to be truly really black, have a real deep, rich darkness tone to it. You know, a thief in the night type thing, or a black cougar going through the forest, something like that. And we actually have a mix this time, already, once again, of course, base coated with black. And for the highlights, I've mixed in some model color dark Prussian blue into the black. For our next color, I have added in some shadow gray to the previous mix. We don't want to add too much blue because we don't want it to turn actual blue here. So that's why we're going for a more bluish gray color, but just proceeding to work on the highlights as always, layering so we get that smooth transition between colors. And for the final highlight, we are going with straight shadow gray, and I decided to give the hat a little bit of texture, so we're kind of bouncing the brush along the edge, just give you the idea maybe the hat's a different type of fabric, something a bit more rough material, or it's got a few dings and dents in it, but just spices it up a little bit. So we did cool black, and now of course we have to do warm black, and we do that by adding browns. And I admit I'm cheating a little bit here. This is more of a very, very dark brown rather than highlighting black, but this is kind of my preferred method for painting leathers because I like showing some of the natural leather colors showing through. But what we have here is we're applying the highlight with a mix of black and Vallejo model color Camo Black Brown. For our next highlight, I've added some model color leather brown to the mix. Sorry, I kind of slid off camera here for a moment. And just proceeding to add more of the highlights. And then the final highlight is leather brown mixed with beige brown, and this is actually a little bit more than just a highlight. This is adding some weathering to it as well. I really like doing this with leather, especially leather boots, to show they have a bit more wear because they're going to take the most damage as opposed to like a leather jacket. So stippling it on just like we did with the hat to show some of that natural leather color from underneath starting to show through. Also shows a little bit more dirt to the boots. So we're all done with painting black on the figure, but there's still other things to paint and learn. So we're moving on to his whiskey bottle that he has, and I decided to paint a nice green color. The trick here is trying to paint something that's glass, obviously transparent, that can't be painted transparent due to we're painting a physical object, opaque object. But we're going to give it a shot anyway. Decided to go for green, so we base coated with a mix of Vallejo model colors, deep green mixed with black green, and now I'm using flat yellow for the highlights. And I'm trying to paint this similar how we would paint a gemstone, something that's very reflective. We're adding the highlights towards the bottom of the bottle and also on the edges to give the impression that the liquid in the bottle is going to reflect the light more and that the liquid's going to be on the bottom. So we're going to highlight towards the bottom and then shade towards the top. For the second highlight, more of the flat yellow added, and you can see how we're working it, trying to keep it more towards the bottom, but we also have to highlight the edges because this we really have to be very dramatic with the highlights to get the nature of a reflective piece of glass. And for our final highlights, more flat yellow added. You can see really working on the edges now, so we get that nice reflective nature of the glass, hopefully being recreated. Then for our shade towards the top of the bottle, we have black mixed with black green, and we're putting it right up to the edge there, so we have that really good contrast between the much more yellow edge with the darker area. So really hopefully makes the bottle pop, gives it a reflective nature on its own without putting a gloss coat on it. After that was done, I felt that the bottle could still use a little bit of sparkle, so I went back and added white. So we have our deep green, flat yellow, and white mixture. And you can see just on the edges of the edges, essentially, the corners there, just adding a little bit more pop to our bottle. Hey, that was a joke. Briefly, I'll mention that I did paint the vest blue, specifically dark blue with a little bit of white added. Figured that would go well with the green. Also painted the headband color the same. Was looking a little bit plain though, so right before I finished the miniature, I decided to add just a little bit more zip to the vest. It was just too plain looking solid color, so just some dots, very lightly colored dots, just a slight color difference from the vest itself, a little magic blue added to our dark blue, and that little bit really helps that small area just look so much more interesting. So see, those little things you add really add to the miniature. Also, there is a small amount of skin we have to paint, and went with my old traditional. I usually don't like actual flesh colors on their own because they don't work too well. However, I do like the Vallejo Panzer Aces set of base color, highlight flesh, and shadow flesh. And I put down base flesh with a little bit of the shadow flesh mixed in, and now I am putting on the base coat with just straight base flesh. And then for the highlights, we simply mix in the highlight flesh to our base flesh. And just proceed to add them. I think I did 2. There's such a small amount of skin here, you don't have to worry about doing 3 or 4 or 5 layers. Just 1 or 2. Actually, 2 or 3 is good. Once finished, I decided I wanted a little bit more brown tone to the skin. I honestly couldn't decide if I wanted him to be a gunfighter, more tan or more pale, but a little bit more brown also helps to shade the brown hair. So a little light wash with brown ink, just add a little bit more color to the skin, and add a little bit of a dark line here and there, especially between the fingers. Final thing to do was to add a little bit of gloss varnish to the glass, and that's after flat varnishing the entire model. I'm not a huge fan of gloss varnish on bits like this because it tends to counteract the highlights that we painted onto the miniature itself, but I want to mention it in case some people like it, and this is what it looks like when you apply it. And with that, we are done with our gunfighter and how to paint black. We went over several different ways to do it. We did the neutral highlights on the jacket. We did a slightly warmer, more faded black on the pants. We did a cool black for the hat and sort of a dark brown, very warm black for the boots. So 4 different ways you can do it. I did this as an experiment to show you 4 different ways, but I really wouldn't normally use this many ways to paint black on the same miniature. 1 or 2 is more than enough. And if you want to highlight black more, some people do like to go up to a very light gray, just be sure to only do it on the very sharp edges, not on the rounded surfaces, because the main thing you want to keep in mind if you're painting black is to paint black, not gray, not dark gray, not white. So, hope you learned something, and tune in next time for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.